I should never have taken that shortcut. It was late at night, and I was driving home after a long day at work. My GPS showed me a shorter route, cutting through the Indiana countryside, and I, exhausted, decided to take it. The road was deserted, surrounded by dark fields and tall trees that swayed in the wind. My headlights were the only light in that silent expanse. The radio was crackling, unable to tune into any station, so I let the car immerse itself in the monotonous sound of the engine and the asphalt beneath the tires. After a few miles, I saw the sign, a villa bridge, 1 mile. That was when I felt the first chill. I had heard stories about that place before. Drivers spoke of a woman in white who would appear on the road, asking for a ride. Others said that when crossing the bridge at night, you could hear a faint cry, as if someone was asking for help. I sped up a little. I didn't believe in ghosts, but something about this road felt wrong. The fog began to rise from the river just before the bridge. My headlights cut through the darkness, casting strange shadows on the rusted metal of the structure. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the bridge. My heart raced. It was a woman. She was wearing a long, dirty, torn white dress, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. Her bare feet were on the wet asphalt, and her arms hung at her sides, motionless. She was staring straight at me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, blocking my path. The wind blew hard, and the fog danced around her. The radio hissed again, and then a low, slurred voice whispered through the speaker, "Please, help me." My lungs seized up. This couldn't be happening. I blinked a few times, trying to convince my mind that it was just an illusion. But when I looked again, the woman was closer. I didn't see her move. She was just closer than before. My breathing became heavy. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted to 3, hoping that when I opened them again, she would be gone. But now, she was right in front of the car. Her face was visible, and I wished I had never looked. Her eyes were too deep, empty, as if there was no life in them. Her skin was pale and cold, with blue spots around her neck, as if someone had strangled her. She reached up with one hand and touched the hood of the car, and then she whispered a single word, "Why?" The engine died. The car stopped completely. Silence fell over everything. I tried to breathe, but the air seemed to have disappeared. My fingers trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed my terrified expression. But then, I noticed something else. There was someone in the back seat. Panic took over me. The rearview mirror glass fogged up as faint breathing filled the car. I turned around suddenly, but there was no one there. Then, a cry began. Software, sad. I looked back at the bridge. The woman was no longer there, but the crying continued. And then, I felt it. Cold fingers touched the back of my neck. I screamed, and then, everything went black. My vision returned as if I were emerging from a nightmare. The car was still parked in the middle of the bridge. The engine was off. The radio was silent, but the worst was still there. The crying, low, broken, as if the pain in the voice was too old to explain. My fingers were so stiff I could barely move my hands on the steering wheel. My whole body was shaking. I slowly turned my head to the back seat. It was still empty, but I knew something was there with me. The rearview mirror was still fogged up with breath. The crying grew louder, and then a voice, weak, cracked, as if it was struggling to get out of the afterlife. "Why did you leave me here?" My stomach sank. The invisible hand touched the back of my neck again, and then the car shook. The windows rattled, and I felt a sharp chill run up my spine. It was as if the bridge itself was alive, writhing, trying to swallow me. I had to get out of here. My fingers struggled to turn the key. The engine coughed, sputtered. Nothing. The voice behind me grew louder. "You can't leave me alone. Again." Panic swallowed me whole. I didn't know who she was, but she knew who I was. My vision blurred. Images began to flash in my mind, as if memories that weren't mine were being forced into my head. I saw it, the bridge, many years ago. A cold night, like this one. A woman crying, calling for help, and a car, driving right by, leaving her behind. My breath caught. No, it wasn't me, I tried to say. The pressure in the car increased. The windows began to crack. You were just like them. The whispers were coming from all directions now. Old voices mixed together, some crying, some whispering. The radio turned on by itself, but it didn't play music. It played screams. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, and that's when she appeared, sitting in the back seat, her white dress now soaked in blood, her skin blue from the cold, her eyes empty, but seeing me clearly. And then she smiled. Now it's your turn. The car sank. The bridge disappeared. I was falling into the darkness of the river below, as if reality had shattered around me. My lungs burned. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. And then I felt it, fingers gripping my wrists, dragging me down. Her face underwater, her hair floating like seaweed, her smile pale and distorted. My vision went black, and then I woke up. The car was on the other side of the bridge. The engine was running. The radio was playing an old song softly. I was shaking all over, cold sweat covering my skin. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but on the window, there was a wet handprint and a single word written in the fog on the glass. Thank you. I stepped on the gas and drove away as fast as I could. But I knew she never let me go. The Avila Bridge never forgets those who cross it. And now I was part of the legend too. I've never been one to believe in ghosts. I mean, I've always liked scary stories, but to me, they were just that, stories. That is, until the night I walked into Central State Hospital. It was an old mental hospital that had been closed for decades. For years, rumors had circulated about what went on inside. Inhumane treatments, forgotten patients, illegal experiments. Some said the screams of the inmates still echoed through the halls at night. I didn't believe any of it. But that night, something made me believe. It all started because of a bet. My friends and I were in Indianapolis drinking at a bar when someone mentioned the hospital. Ryan, always the brave one, or the dumb one, said we could explore the place and film everything to prove the stories were bullshit. I hesitated, not because I believed the rumors, but because I knew the place wasn't safe. Ashley laughed. What's wrong, Jake? Scared of an abandoned hospital? I rolled my eyes and accepted the challenge. Minutes later, there we were, standing in front of Central State Hospital. The imposing structure loomed against the cloudy sky, its dark windows like empty eyes. The iron fence around it was rusted and partially collapsed. Everything about it reeked of abandonment. Ryan kicked the fence and pushed his way through. Welcome to the worst mistake of our lives, he joked. The wind whistled through the deserted hallways. My chest felt heavy as we walked through the rusty doors. The inside was worse than I had imagined. The smell of mold and decay permeated the air. Old equipment was scattered across the floor, and rusty wheelchairs sat in corners. But worst of all were the medical files scattered everywhere. Yellowed papers, some stained, as if they had been left behind in a hurry. Ashley picked one up. Patient 1321. Status, unrecoverable. She looked at me, frowning. What does that mean? It means he never left here. Silence fell between us. Ryan laughed. Guys, this is just an old hospital. Let's go up to the third floor and film something scary. Our group walked down the dark hallways. Every footstep echoed, as if the building itself was listening. Then something moved at the end of the hall. My heart sank. Ryan shined the flashlight. What was that? I wanted to believe it was just a rat, but the shadow I saw wasn't an animal. I stepped back. Let's get out of here, Ashley snorted. Relax, Jake. You're impressed with these stories. Ryan kept walking. We passed a hallway where old padded cells still stood intact. The doors creaked in the wind. Then we heard it. Whispers, low, barely audible. Ashley stopped. "Did you hear that?" No one answered. Because we did. The air grew colder, and then all the padded doors slammed shut at once. My stomach turned. The sound echoed through the hospital, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Ryan swallowed hard. It must be the wind, but there was no wind. I turned to run back to the exit, but when I looked down the hallway, it wasn't the same anymore. The walls were clean. The floor gleamed. The equipment was organized. The hospital was no longer abandoned. But that was impossible. I blinked several times, trying to understand. Then I heard a scream, coming from the third floor. Ryan grabbed my arm. "Dude, what's going on?" Ashley covered her mouth, shaking. Before we could react, the lights on the ceiling flickered, and at the end of the hallway, someone appeared. Tall, thin, wearing a doctor's uniform from the last century. His face was covered by an old gas mask, and his hands were holding something that looked like a rusty scalpel. And then, he started walking towards us. The light went out completely, and the entire hospital was plunged into darkness. The darkness swallowed us. My breath caught in my throat. Everything around me seemed to dissolve into a heavy, suffocating silence. Then, the footsteps began. They weren't normal. They echoed through the hallway, slow, dragging, as if something was approaching too slowly, savoring every second of our presence there. Ryan grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold. "Run." I didn't think twice. Ashley was already in front, feeling the walls in a desperate attempt to find a way out. The sound of the footsteps became faster, and then the whisper came, low, wet, too close. "It's not over yet." A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to run, but something pulled my shirt. I screamed and pulled away, tripping over something on the floor. My knees hit the dirty tile. When I looked back, I saw him. The man in the gas mask was only a few feet away from me. His eyes were not visible, but I could feel him seeing me. And then, he raised the scalpel. The rusty blade glinted in the little light that was left. Dread gripped me. Ashley grabbed my hand and pulled me up. "Come on," the whisper came again. "It's too late." Ryan kicked a door next to me and it swung open with a bang. We rushed in and locked it from the inside. We heard a sharp thud against the wood, and another, and another. Each thud made the structure shake. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my flashlight. "What was that?" Ashley whispered, leaning against the wall. Ryan ran his hand over his face, unable to answer. The hospital was alive, and it didn't want us to leave. The radio on the table in the room where we hid crackled, the same crackling from the hallway, and then a voice, low, drawn out, but familiar. "Jake." My heart stopped. I knew that voice. My mother who had been dead for years. My hands went cold. "This isn't real." The voice came again. "You need to get out of here." The radio crackled even louder, and then it stopped. The silence was worse. Neither of us moved. And then, the knocking on the door stopped. The hallway went quiet. Too quiet. Ryan looked at me. "What now?" Ashley moved closer to the door, putting her ear to it. I think he was... Bam! The door exploded inward. We were thrown back by the force of the impact. Amidst the dust and debris, he was there, the man in the gas mask. But now, he wasn't alone. Behind him, dark silhouettes moved in the corners of the room. Patients. They had blank white eyes, and they were all staring at me. My mind went haywire. "Run!" Ryan yelled. We raced down the hallway, dodging fallen equipment and rusty wheelchairs. The hospital seemed to close in around us. The hallway stretched. The doors disappeared. There was no way out. Ashley started to cry. "This isn't possible!" The whisper came back. "You never left here, Jake." I stopped running. My vision blurred. Images began to flash through my mind. A white room, a doctor holding a clipboard, padded walls. my mother crying on the other side of a glass window. My chest tightened. No, this wasn't true. This couldn't be true. Ryan shook me. What is it? The images disappeared. The hospital went back to the way it was. And then we saw it. The exit door. We ran as fast as we could. The pounding of footsteps behind us grew louder. The radio hissed again. The air grew thick. My legs burned. But we made it to the door. Ashley was the first to go through. Ryan was right behind her. I was the last. And before I left, I looked back. The man in the mask stood in the hallway. A shadow of a smile formed beneath the mask. And then, he waved at me. The door closed by itself. Silence returned. I was outside. Ryan and Ashley were breathing heavily beside me. The hospital looked normal now, but something told me it had never been a normal hospital. The wind blew hard, bringing one last echo from the hallway. You'll come back, and I knew it. Somehow, that was true. I should never have stopped on that bridge. The night was dark, and the deserted road stretched out before me, lined with trees that seemed to bend under the weight of the cold wind. My car cut through the darkness like a blade, its headlights illuminating the faded yellow line on the asphalt. I drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head after a hard day. I was tired, irritable, and, to be honest, a little restless. Maybe it was the empty road, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that I was being watched. The GPS wasn't working properly. The screen flickered, the location locked. I should have taken the main highway, but I got lost somewhere and ended up on a narrow country road. And then I saw the bridge. It was old, cracked concrete covered in moss on the sides. The sign next to it read, Edna Collins Bridge. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I'd heard about this place before. The bridge was said to be cursed. The legend told of a little girl named Edna Collins, who used to swim in the river beneath the bridge in the early 20th century. Her parents would go and get her every afternoon, but one day, they forgot. When they returned, it was too late. The girl's body was found floating in the water. Ever since then, drivers who pass by the bridge at night have reported hearing knocking on their car windows, as if someone was trying to get in. Some have even reported seeing the figure of a pale little girl asking for a ride. I never believed these stories. But that night, something changed. I approached the bridge slowly, the sound of the tires echoing on the worn concrete. Halfway across, I felt a chill run down my spine. The car engine failed. The radio hissed. And then, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking on the rear window. My lungs seized up. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The glass was clear, dark, reflecting only my own pale face. But then, the temperature inside the car plummeted. My breath turned to steam. The radio turned on by itself, an unsettling static filling the room. Then, a voice, faint, whispering, "Can you take me home?" My stomach churned. I wasn't alone in the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, a small figure sat. It was a girl. Her wet hair dripped down her shoulders, her white dress clinging to her body. She looked about 8 years old, too pale, too silent. My mouth went dry. Who are you?" She didn't answer. Her dark eyes just stared at me. My whole body screamed at me not to move. But then, the car door opened by itself, and in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The silence fell like a wall of ice, but the radio kept crackling, and in the midst of the static, I heard another sentence. "Why did you forget me too?" My heart stopped. I didn't know that girl, but she knew me. The car windows fogged up, and then, in the midst of the fog forming on the front window, a small hand appeared, drawing a name. My name. The car engine roared back to life, the radio static stopped, and silence returned. The back seat was empty, but I knew. The curse of the Edna Collins Bridge wasn't over yet. The car was silent. The engine hummed low. The headlights cut through the darkness, and my fingers trembled on the steering wheel. I tried to convince myself that it hadn't happened, but the name written on the window, My name was still there. I wanted to get out of there, to speed away and never look back. But then the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. Now it was coming from all sides of the car. My heart raced. The rear window fogged up again. This time a new message appeared, written with invisible fingers in the fog. "Why have you forgotten me too?" Panic tightened my throat. I'd never met Edna Collins. So why did she know my name? The temperature dropped further. The air grew thick, as if the entire bridge were trying to swallow me. My reflection in the rearview mirror became distorted, and then I saw something behind me. The little girl was there again. But now, she wasn't alone. Behind her, shadows writhed in the back seat, dark and shapeless, like other children were there, trapped, forgotten. My skin went cold. The only thing I could do was get out of there. I turned the key hard. The engine roared. The radio crackled, and a voice whispered in the static, "No one gets off the bridge." I stepped on the gas. The wheels spun, and the car lurched forward. But the feeling of being pulled back was real. It was like something was holding the car together, trying to keep me there. The rearview mirror began to shake. The glass cracked. The whispers of the children filled the car. And then I screamed. I accelerated with all my might. The car shot forward, breaking through the fog. The radio turned off by itself, and the knocking suddenly stopped. As I crossed the bridge, I felt the heaviness in the air disappear. The back seat went silent. I didn't look in the mirror. I knew that if I did, I would still see those shadows. I kept driving and driving, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. When I finally reached a gas station, I stopped the car and stumbled out. My lungs felt like they couldn't take in enough air. A gas station attendant came up to me, frowning. "Hey man, you okay?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. He looked at my car and his eyes widened. "What the hell happened to your back window?" I turned around slowly. The glass was covered in small handprints, as if several children had pressed their palms against it. The attendant took a step back. "Dude, did you drive over the Edna Collins Bridge?" I didn't answer. I just got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. But I knew those kids were still with me, and sooner or later, I would have to go back. I should never have accepted that challenge. The plan seemed simple: spend an entire hour inside Step Cemetery, alone after midnight. It was just a joke, a stupid bet between friends who wanted to prove themselves brave. As always, I tried to laugh it off and pretend I didn't care, but as night fell and the temperature dropped, something inside me knew it was a mistake. Step Cemetery was no ordinary place. It was said to be the most haunted place in Indiana, an old, isolated cemetery, lost in the middle of the woods. Many of the tombstones were broken or covered in moss, as if time had forgotten the place. But the scariest story of all was about the shadowy child. No one knew exactly where it came from. Some said it was the spirit of a baby buried there, whose grave had been desecrated. Others said it was something worse, an entity that took the form of a child to lure the unwary. Everyone agreed on one thing: if you hear small footsteps behind you, never look back. That night, I learned that the legends were true. The cemetery gate was crooked, rusted, and creaked slightly in the wind. I glanced at my watch. 12:07 a.m. I held my flashlight steady and walked inside. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no leaves moving, nothing, just my own breathing. The dirt floor was uneven, and each step made a noise that seemed too loud. I scanned the headstones, some tilted, others broken in half. The air had a strange smell of damp earth and rotting wood. As I walked along, I felt a presence, as if something was watching, but there was no one there. I kept walking until I found the grave of the mother in black. It was the most famous one in the cemetery. It was said that a woman dressed in mourning was often seen kneeling on that tombstone, weeping for the soul of her son. Some visitors swore that if they stood there too long, they would feel small hands tugging at their clothes. The air grew heavier. The flashlight flickered. My chest tightened. I glanced at my watch. I had 40 minutes left before I had to leave. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Small. Faint. Behind me. My heart froze. The blood pounded in my ears. The rules were clear. If you hear the footsteps, don't look. My breath became shallow, but the footsteps came closer. My entire body tensed. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The footsteps stopped just behind me. My instincts screamed to run, but then a voice whispered, quiet, hoarse, cold. "Help me." My throat went dry. I couldn't look. I didn't want to look, but something made me turn my head, and that's when I saw it. A child, alone, small, wearing old clothes, a white dress stained with dirt, but her face, it wasn't normal. Her skin looked like a living shadow, as if the darkness itself had devoured her features. Her eyes were two black holes, sucking in the light from the flashlight, and then she smiled. Not a human smile, a hollow smile, too big, artificial. The flashlight flickered. Time stopped. I felt a shiver run up my spine. Then I felt it. Small, cold fingers touched my hand. My vision went black, and everything around me disappeared. I opened my eyes. The cemetery looked different. The headstones were new. The ground looked clean. There were fresh flowers on the graves. But that wasn't possible. It was like I was in another time, or another reality. I looked at the clock. It was still 12:07 a.m. My chest rose and fell in despair. The air was heavy. I heard the small footsteps again. And then, the voice. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was distorted. "You never left here." The flashlight failed, and darkness swallowed me. The world around me felt wrong. The cemetery that had once been covered in moss and broken tombstones now felt new, as if I had been transported to another time. The smell of damp earth was still there, but the silence was even more suffocating. The watch on my wrist still read 0007, as if time had stopped. But the worst part? I could still hear the small footsteps behind me. They were slow, steady, getting closer, inch by inch. My breathing became heavy. I knew I shouldn't look, but I had looked once before, and now I couldn't ignore it anymore. My entire body was shaking. I swallowed hard and turned slowly. The child was still there, but now she was closer. Her face was still indistinct, as if shadows were curling around her skin. Her eyes were two dark holes, too deep, like windows to a place I shouldn't see. She smiled, and when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. No sound, just the echo of my own heart beating in my chest. The flashlight flickered again. Then she whispered, "Did you come for me?" My stomach sank. I didn't know what to say. The words caught in my throat. That was when she reached out for me. Her small fingers were too pale and thin, as if they belonged to a body that had no life left. My body froze. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. The darkness around the cemetery seemed to take shape, moving like a living mist. The wind blew harder, and a low, distant sound began to spread through the air. A cry, low, weak, but it wasn't hers. It was the earth. It was the graves. My chest tightened. Suddenly, something grabbed my ankle. I looked down. A second hand, reaching out of the earth beside the grave of the mother in black. It pulled me in. A scream escaped my throat as I tried to pull myself free, kicking the dirt around me. But another hand appeared. Then another, and another. They were children's hands, the hands of several children, all of them pulling me down. My body sank into the soft earth, as if the ground were swallowing me. My lungs burned. The cries of the voices grew louder, turning into wails. And then, among the screams, a new voice echoed. "You forgot about me." I looked up. The dark child was no longer smiling. Now she was crying. Her dark eyes filled with thick, dark tears streaming down her face. "You promised to come back." My thoughts were overwhelmed by panic. I didn't know her, but she knew me. Something inside me told me that this wasn't the first time that I'd been here before. My heart raced. The grip on my ankle tightened. My body was almost completely buried in the earth. And then, one last thing happened. The child screamed, a loud, piercing sound like glass shattering inside my head. Everything around me shook. The child's hands disappeared. The mist dissipated. The ground spat me out. And suddenly, I was back. The cemetery was the same as before. Old, abandoned, silent. The watch on my wrist read 0008. My vision was blurry. My hands were shaking. My chest was rising and falling uncontrollably. I looked back. The child was gone. Everything seemed normal. But I knew nothing was normal. I stumbled to the cemetery exit, stumbling over rocks and uneven dirt. The gate was open, as if it had never been touched. I ran to the car. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. Accelerating, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cemetery was behind me. But then, I saw something in the back seat, a small mark, a handprint on the glass, and below it, a single word drawn in the dust: "Go back." My lungs seized up. My chest felt cold. The road ahead of me seemed to stretch on, as if I would never get out of there. But I kept driving, because now I knew the truth. The dark child didn't want me to see her. She wanted me to remember, and sooner or later, I would have to go back. I should never have gone down that tunnel. The first time I heard about it was one cold October night while we were drinking around a campfire. My friend Ryan told the story as if it were a local legend, something that has been passed down from generation to generation to scare children and tourists. The Tunnelton Tunnel in southern Indiana was built in the late 1800s, and according to the stories, many workers died during its construction. Some were buried by the collapse of one of the internal supports. Others disappeared without a trace. But the most famous of all was a worker who lost his life in a horrific way, decapitated by a freight train while working on the track. It is said that his spirit has never left the tunnel since. But what really scared people wasn't the story of an ordinary ghost. It was the description of him. Witnesses said that if you stayed inside the tunnel long enough, you would see a man in a railroad uniform standing at the end of the tunnel. In the darkness, he had no eyes, just empty holes in his face, staring at you without seeing. The legend said that if he found you inside the tunnel, you would never come out again. I laughed at the time. I thought it was just another story to scare the most impressionable. But then Ryan challenged everyone. If it's just a story, let's go and prove it's nothing. I wanted to refuse, but for some reason, I accepted. And now, here I was. The tunnel rose before me, an open mouth to darkness. The entrance was surrounded by tall grass and rusty rails. The cold wind bit my skin, and the moon barely illuminated the cloudy sky. I took a deep breath and took the first step inside. The flashlight in my hand trembled slightly. Ryan and the others had given up at the last minute, but I wanted to prove that nothing was going to happen. The silence was absolute. My footsteps echoed against the stone walls. The air inside the tunnel was colder, and a musty, rusty smell filled my nostrils. After walking for about 20 meters, I turned to look at the entrance. It seemed further away than it should have. The moonlight barely managed to penetrate the fog that was beginning to form around it. I swallowed hard and continued. After a few minutes, something changed. The flashlight blinked, once, twice, then it went out completely. My heart raced. I swung the flashlight, tapped the side of it. Nothing. Then, a sound came from the end of the tunnel. Low, slow, like the shuffling of feet. My muscles locked. I wasn't alone. Instinct screamed at me not to look back, but I did. At the end of the tunnel, in the deepest darkness, there was something there, a tall silhouette, standing in the middle of the tracks. I couldn't see his face, but something told me he could see me. The sound of footsteps returned, and he began walking towards me. My blood ran cold. Each step he took was dragging, as if he were sliding across the ground. The fog grew thicker, making the air thicker. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but something was stopping me. And then, he stepped out of the shadows. My throat closed up. He wore an old railway uniform covered in dust and dirt. But his face, it was an empty hole. The eyes were gone, just two black cavities, as if someone had ripped the soul out of that body and left nothing in its place. I couldn't breathe. The eyeless man raised his hand and pointed at me. Then the entire tunnel shook. I heard a distant whistle, the sound of a train approaching, but there had been no running tracks here for decades. The noise grew louder, getting closer too quickly. The ground beneath my feet shook, and the wind blew hard inside the tunnel. My ears rang. The figure stood still, pointing at me. The invisible train was coming, and I was in the middle of the tracks. My body finally reacted. I turned on my heel and ran like I had never run before. The tunnel seemed to stretch on, the end never coming. The sound of the train grew louder. The hot, humid air hit my back. Something touched the back of my neck. I jumped out of the tunnel at the last second, falling to my knees on the cold earth. The sound stopped. There was no train. There was nothing. I looked back, my chest rising and falling in despair. The tunnel was silent again, but in the darkness, deep inside, he was still there, watching me with eyes that weren't there. Then the static from my radio exploded inside the car, and a faint voice whispered, "It's not over yet." The air grew heavy, and I knew, this isn't over. My lungs were burning. My heart felt like it was going to explode inside my chest. I was kneeling on the cold ground, panting, trying to understand what had just happened. The tunnel behind me was silent, but I knew he was still there, the man with no eyes. Even though I couldn't see him now, I felt his presence, as if the dark holes where his eyes should have been were glued to me. I needed to get out of there. I stood up, my legs shaking as if they would give out at any moment. My car was parked a few meters away, a solitary point of reality in the middle of that suffocating darkness. I forced myself to walk, glancing back quickly. The tunnel was just a black hole in the landscape. No movement, no sound, but the feeling of being watched only grew. I got into the car and locked the doors, as if that would protect me from something that was not of this world. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine stalled. My stomach churned. I tried again. The car coughed and stopped again. Panic began to creep up my spine. Then the radio turned on by itself. A low hiss filled the car. My skin crawled all over. The static intensified, as if something was trying to speak through it. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, sweating. The hissing stopped, and a faint voice whispered, "Why did you come back?" My throat went dry. I didn't come back. I just wanted to run away. But before I could react, the passenger window fogged up, as if someone was breathing outside. My chest tightened, and then an invisible finger appeared, writing something in the fog on the glass. A single word: train. My eyes widened. The sound of the whistle echoed across the field, and this time I saw it. In the distance on the tracks, a train was coming toward me, but the tracks were no longer active. There was no way a train could have been running here for decades. The ground began to shake beneath the car. The light from the train's headlight grew in the darkness. The engine still wouldn't start. I slammed my fist on the dashboard. "Start it, damn it!" The train was getting closer. The deafening whistle made my vision shake, and then something moved in the rearview mirror. My eyes fixed on the mirror, and I saw it. In the back seat, the man with no eyes. He sat there, motionless, his face turned directly toward me. But where his eyes should have been, there were still only black, empty holes. My blood ran cold. His lips moved, but he didn't speak. He whispered inside my mind, "You should never have left the tunnel." My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the keys. I tried again. The engine started. I didn't think. I accelerated full throttle. The car skidded on the gravel, picking up speed. The train was almost on top of me, but before I completely left the road, the rearview mirror cracked by itself. A final whisper echoed in the car. "See you soon." I sped down the road, feeling the air around me change, as if I was escaping from something that had almost caught me. The train disappeared. The sound disappeared. I looked back. The tunnel was empty again, as if nothing had happened. I drove without stopping until I got home. Every light I passed, every shadow in the path made me feel like he was still there. When I finally parked, my muscles were stiff, my mind a mess. But I was alive. I went inside and locked all the doors. The silence of my apartment had never felt so good. I threw the keys on the counter and went to the bathroom. I needed to look at myself in the mirror. I needed to convince myself that everything was okay. But when I looked, my heart almost stopped. In the corner of the mirror, as if someone had scratched the dust with a finger, 2 dark marks, the exact size of 2 missing eyes. I stumbled backwards, hitting the wall, and then the mirror cracked by itself. A final message appeared on the glass, written on the inside. "The tunnel never forgets." My body froze. Now I knew the truth. I never left the Tunnelton tunnel completely, and sooner or later, he would come for me. I should never have looked at him. It was a cold night in Nevada, and I was driving home from work later than usual. The deserted highway cut through the desert like a dark scar, lit only by the headlights of my car and the distant glow of a motel sign blinking on the side of the road. My body was tired, my mind a jumble of confused thoughts. All I wanted to do was get home and sleep. But then I saw him, a tall man, standing on the side of the road, wearing an impeccable black suit. He was standing still, almost like a statue, staring straight at me. There shouldn't have been anyone there. This stretch of road was isolated, with no houses nearby. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't see his face properly. The darkness of the night and the way his features seemed blurred, as if the very air around him were shaking, made it impossible for me to see any detail. My first instinct was not to stop, but as I passed him, something inside me forced me to look in the rearview mirror. And that's when I realized he was closer. My heart skipped a beat. The man hadn't moved. He couldn't have moved that fast. But now, he was just a few feet behind the car. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I accelerated. That feeling of being watched consumed me. With each new glance in the mirror, he seemed closer. My mind screamed at me not to look anymore. But how could I not? It was as if he knew I was watching. And then, the car radio turned on by itself. Static filled the interior of the vehicle and a faint voice whispered through the hiss, "You've seen me. Now I can see you too." My lungs seized up. I tried to turn off the radio, but the buttons wouldn't respond. The light on the dashboard blinked. The car engine sputtered. And then, everything shut down at once. The car died in the middle of the road. I was alone, in the dark. And when I looked in the rearview mirror again, he was right behind the car. The man in the black suit had no face, just a thick shadow where his eyes, his mouth, his identity should have been. And then, he smiled. But not a normal smile. It was as if something had folded inside the darkness, creating a line of white teeth where there had been nothing before. The car door locked by itself. The radio hissed louder, and the man raised one of his hands. The reality around me distorted. Everything felt heavy. My vision went blank for a second, and then I was somewhere else. The asphalt disappeared. Now I was standing in an empty city with buildings I didn't recognize. The only thing that remained the same was him. The man in the black suit was still there. Now he was walking towards me. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move, and when he finally stopped in front of me, I felt something terrible. I had been there before, but I didn't remember. And then, he whispered inside my mind, "If you see me, it's because you already belong to me." My vision went dark, and I disappeared. Darkness swallowed me. There was no sound, no time, just absolute emptiness around me. My mind tried to process what had happened, but it was as if I were floating in nothingness. Then I felt it. He was still there, the man in the black suit. Even though I couldn't see him, I knew he was close. I could feel his presence curling around me, cold, heavy. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, reality returned. I was back in my car. The engine was running. The radio was playing a low, old-school song, something from the 50s. The road ahead of me was the same, but something was different. My hands shook as I touched the steering wheel. I looked around, trying to find some sign of what had just happened. The clock on the dashboard read 3:33 a.m., but the problem was, the last time I looked, it was still 11:45 p.m. Almost 4 hours had gone by. Panic tightened my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I had fainted, maybe it was a stress attack. But then, I noticed the detail that made my blood run cold. The rear-view mirror was turned down, as if someone had adjusted it. My throat went dry. I didn't touch the rear-view mirror. My hands were still shaking as I slowly repositioned it. And that's when I saw it. He was in the back seat. My body froze. The silhouette of the man in the black suit took up almost all the space, his presence dense, impossible to ignore. My reflection in the mirror showed his face, or rather, the lack of one. Just a void, a black hole of pure absence, but he was smiling. White teeth peeked out from the darkness where his mouth should have been. And then, he whispered, "You shouldn't have looked at me." A scream caught in my throat. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I needed to get out of there. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, pushing the car forward. But then, the road began to change. The streetlights flickered erratically. The signs along the way no longer had words, only strange symbols, like a language I couldn't understand. Reality was shattering around me. Then, a terrible sound filled the car. Static. The radio turned on by itself. The volume turned up to maximum. I tried to turn it off, but the buttons wouldn't respond. And through the static, a familiar voice whispered, "Come home, before he takes you forever." My heart nearly stopped. It was my voice. The radio was playing my own voice, but it was slurred and distorted. Panic gripped me. The car was shaking. The lights flickered again, and when I looked in the rearview mirror again, he was gone. But I knew. He hadn't gone away. He was inside me now. I drove without stopping until I reached my house. I didn't bother locking the car or turning off the lights. I just ran inside, slamming the door behind me, trying to catch my breath. Everything seemed normal. The clock on the wall read 4:04 a.m. The living room was the same as I'd left it, but something was wrong. The silence was too deep. I picked up my phone to check my messages, to see if anyone had called me while I was missing. No alerts, no notifications. But then, my phone vibrated in my hands. It was a message. No number, no ID, just a picture. My hand felt cold as I opened the picture. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my bed, but I hadn't gone to my room yet, so whatever was lying there, it wasn't me. The phone fell from my hand, and then, the light in my room turned off by itself. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I wasn't alone anymore. The man in the black suit had entered my house. My mind screamed to run away. But run away to where? I would never be alone again. Because now, he saw me, and once he saw you, he never left. I should never have bought that doll. It was a warm Sunday in rural Pennsylvania, and I had decided to spend the afternoon exploring a local antiques fair that took place once a month. I had always enjoyed these things. Old objects have stories, and I liked the feeling of bringing a piece of the past into my home. But that doll, it shouldn't have been there. I found it in a booth at the end of the fair, a dark corner where the lights were dim and the merchandise looked forgotten by time. The vendor was an elderly man with sunken eyes and a vacant expression, as if he had spent too many years dealing with things no one wanted. The doll sat on a wooden table, among old clocks and faded photographs. She was old, made of worn porcelain, with dull blonde hair and a lace dress that had turned yellow with age. But what caught my attention most were her glass eyes. Unlike any other doll I had ever seen, her eyes looked all too human. And the strangest thing, she wasn't for sale. At least that's what the man told me. "This one's not for sale," he muttered, not looking at me directly. "Then why is it on the table?" He hesitated. "Because she always comes back." I laughed, thinking it was just a trick to scare me, but he didn't laugh back. "Look, if you want to take it, take it. But don't say I didn't warn you." That should have been a sign for me to back off, but I was too intrigued. I offered him $20, and he accepted without arguing. When he handed me the doll, I noticed his hands were shaking. I left the fair without thinking much about it, but the moment I got in the car and put the doll in the passenger seat, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. My house was about 30 minutes away from the city. The sun was already starting to set on the horizon when I parked in the garage and took the doll inside. I placed it on a shelf in my office, among some old books and other small relics that I had collected over the years. I stared at it for a while. It looked different now. The glass eyes seemed to follow my movements, even though I knew it was just an illusion. I shrugged and turned off the office light. It was that very night that it all began. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The house was silent, too silent. I looked at the clock, 3:17 in the morning. My eyes were heavy, but a discomfort took over me completely. You know that feeling that someone is watching you? That was it. I turned over in bed, trying to shake off the paranoia, but then I heard a noise in the hallway. Low, a soft thud on the floor as if something small had fallen. My heart raced. I lay there, waiting to hear it again. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe the wind had knocked something off the shelf. But then I heard footsteps, small, slow footsteps, coming from the hallway toward my room. My chest tightened. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The bedroom door was ajar. The darkness of the hallway was thick, and yet I felt something was there. And then something ran past the door. My spine froze. My body froze. I saw it. For a split second, a small silhouette passed through the crack in the door, and I knew what it was. The doll. She was no longer in the office. The air grew heavy. Slowly, I got up from the bed, my heart hammering in my chest. I walked to the door, trying to ignore the growing fear inside me. I looked down the hallway, empty, but I knew I wasn't alone. I turned slowly toward the office. The door was ajar, and in the darkness, she was sitting on the shelf again. But now, her eyes were looking straight at me. My blood ran cold. My first reaction was to convince myself that I had left her there the whole time. But then, I noticed something that made me gasp. Her dress was covered in dust, as if she had been walking around the house. My mind screamed at me to get rid of it, but I had to be sure. I picked up the doll with shaking hands and carried it back to the shelf. I left her sitting in exactly the same position, and to make sure it wouldn't move, I did something that seemed silly, but that at that moment seemed necessary. I put some flour on the floor, around the shelf. If something moved it, I would see the tracks. So I went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, my eyes fixed on the darkness, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. The minutes passed, then an hour, then two. Absolute silence, until I heard a soft crack. My heart raced. I turned to the clock, 4:33 in the morning. The crack came from the office. I got up slowly. The fear was suffocating, but I had to look. I pushed open the bedroom door and walked down the hallway. The office door was open. My breathing became heavy. I turned on the light, and my blood ran cold. The doll was no longer on the shelf. I looked at the floor, the flour around the shelf. There were small footprints. My whole body shook. The footprints led all the way to the door, and then they stopped, as if something had disappeared into thin air. The only thing left on the shelf was a yellowed piece of paper, which I was absolutely certain had not been there before. I picked up the paper with trembling hands and unfolded it. There was only one sentence written on it, in childish handwriting. "Why did you wake me up?" The doll did not want to be disturbed, and now she would not leave me alone anymore. The message trembled in my hands. "Why did you wake me up?" I wanted to believe it was a prank, that somehow my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw the flower on the floor. The small footprints were still there. I wasn't alone in that house. I picked the doll up from the floor, holding it tightly. The cold porcelain felt heavier than before, as if there was something inside it. It seemed to be watching me. The plan was simple: get rid of it immediately. I ran to the back door, determined to throw it away. But then, the lights in the house flickered, and the television in the living room turned on by itself. The screen showed only static. The sound stopped me in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it, the doll's reflection on the TV screen. But there was one detail that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, her eyes were open. I turned around immediately, but the doll still had her eyes closed, or had been before. My heart raced. I ran to the backyard and, without thinking, threw the doll in the trash can. I slammed the lid and took a deep breath. This had to end. I went back inside. The silence hung heavy in the air. I turned off the TV and dimmed the lights, trying to calm my mind. It was just tiredness. It had to be. But as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, something made me stop. The back door was open. I was absolutely certain I had locked it. The butterflies in my stomach returned with a vengeance. Slowly, I walked to the door and looked outside. The night was still. No wind, no sound. But then, my eyes fell on the trash can. The lid was open. The doll was gone. Fear paralyzed me. I turned back into the house, my breathing becoming ragged. My whole body screamed at me not to look up. But when I finally looked up, she was at the top of the stairs, sitting down, staring right at me. My blood froze. My lungs seized up. Then, she fell backwards and began to crawl down the hallway on her own. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. That's when the upstairs light went out on its own, and in the darkness, I heard a childish laugh. Software coming from the hallway. That was too much. I turned and ran out the front door. I got into the car without thinking, locking the doors. My breath was coming in short pants, my eyes wide. I started the engine, but before I could accelerate, my heart stopped. In the passenger seat, the doll was sitting, and on the car window, a new message appeared, as if it had been written on the inside, the same childish handwriting. "You can't leave me." My scream echoed in the night, and in that moment, I knew I would never be free of her. I should never have gone into those woods. It was supposed to be just a trip with friends, a weekend camping trip in a remote location, far from the city, with no internet, no noise from cars, just nature and the stars. We chose a secluded spot in North Carolina, a forested area known as Black Hollow. None of us had heard of the place, but the photos online showed a perfect setting: tall trees, crystal clear streams, and miles of untouched trails. It seemed perfect, but there was something the photos didn't show, something no one talked about, until it was too late. There were 5 of us on that trip: me, Ryan, Ashley, Tom, and Eric. We arrived at the site just before sunset, parked our cars at the trailhead, and began hiking to the campsite. The plan was simple: spend the night in the woods, build a campfire, tell stories, and return the next morning. But as soon as we started the trail, I noticed something strange. The silence. No sound of birds, no rustling of leaves in the wind. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. Ashley noticed it too. "It's a little too quiet, huh?" she commented, looking around. "Maybe the animals have already gone to sleep," Eric joked, trying to hide his discomfort. But I knew something was wrong. And then, it happened. The first voice. Weak. Low. "Jake." I stopped in my tracks. The blood ran cold in my veins. It was my name. Someone had called it from the darkness of the forest, but when I looked at the others, I realized that no one else had heard. I swallowed hard. "What's wrong?" Tom asked, noticing my expression. I could have told him. I could have told him what I heard, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I just shook my head. "Nothing. I thought I heard something," and I kept walking. But the voice, it was still there. We reached the campsite and set up our tents. The campfire was lit, and before long we were talking and laughing, trying to ignore the fact that the forest was still eerily quiet. But I couldn't forget what I had heard. I couldn't ignore that voice. And then, around midnight, it came back. "Jake." My spine stiffened, but this time, I wasn't the only one who heard it. Ashley looked at me, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Everyone went silent. Eric laughed nervously. "It was probably the wind." But there was no wind, and that voice, it was human, it was close, and the worst part, it sounded like me, my own name, spoken in my own voice. Ryan wiped away his smile. "I think we should go to sleep." Everyone agreed, but I knew no one would sleep that night. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a strange cold. The fire had already gone out, and everything around me was too dark. But it wasn't the cold that woke me. It was the sound of footsteps, right outside my tent, small, shuffled. My breath caught in my throat. I stood still, listening to the sound get closer, and then stop right at the entrance to the tent. The zipper started to move. My lungs froze. The fabric slowly opened. I knew it wasn't one of my friends. They would never do that in the middle of the night. So, who was it? My hand shook as I reached for the flashlight beside me. Counting to 3 in my mind, I turned the light directly to the opening of the tent, and I saw it. Small, bare legs, pale skin, soiled with dirt. I didn't recognize that person. But then, she ran. I heard the quick footsteps on the earth, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. I jumped out of the tent, shining the flashlight in all directions. "Who's there?" The wind blew, and then all my friends came out of the tents at the same time. Their faces were pale. Terror was etched in their eyes. Ryan swallowed hard. "Did you hear it too?" Silence was the answer. Ashley looked at me. "Someone's here." I knew she was right. The problem was, they knew we were here too, and they weren't alone. The silence around us was thick, heavy. We were all outside our tents, holding flashlights, our eyes wide. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we knew the truth. There was something in the woods, and it wasn't an animal. Ashley held my arm tightly. Her face was pale. "Jake, someone called you earlier, didn't they?" I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to confirm what everyone already suspected. But then, the voices came back, low, cold, calling our names. Ryan, Ashley, Tom, Eric, and then, even lower, almost inside my head, Jake. My skin crawled all over. Ryan swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just trees and darkness. But we knew something was there. Ashley took a step back. "We need to get out of here," Eric agreed. "Let's go back to the cars now." But when we started to gather our things, we realized the worst. The trails were gone. Where there had once been a path through the woods, there was now only thick vegetation. It was impossible. We knew where we had come from, but now the forest seemed to have changed, as if the environment itself was trapping us. Tom looked around desperately. "This doesn't make sense. The path was here before." Ryan tried to remain calm. "Okay, we'll follow the stars. We just need to keep walking east and we'll reach the road." Ashley pointed up. "What if there are no stars?" I swallowed hard. The sky was completely dark. There was no moon. There was nothing, just pitch black. And then, the footsteps came again. The sound came from all sides. Light, small footsteps, like children were running around us. Eric held the flashlight tightly. "Who's there?" No answer. But then, something ran through the trees. We saw only a figure, small, pale, and when we pointed our flashlights, there was nothing there. My heart raced. Ashley held my arm even tighter. "We need to get out of here, now." No one argued. We just started walking. With each step we took, the forest seemed to change. The trees seemed taller. The mist that had been gone before now covered the ground. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, we saw the first figure up close. It was standing between the trees, small, with its back to us. It looked like a child, but something was wrong. Its arms were too long. Her feet were bare on the cold ground. And then, she turned her head back, but her body didn't move. My lungs seized up. Her eyes were black and sunken with nothing inside. And then, she smiled. Her mouth widened as if her skin was tearing. Ashley screamed. We all ran. We ran aimlessly, just trying to get out of there. The forest seemed endless, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that, no matter where we ran, we always saw a new silhouette standing between the trees, sometimes close, sometimes far. They were watching us. They knew our names, and they were having fun with us. Ryan tripped and fell. When I turned to help him, I saw something moving in the fog behind him. Small hands came out of the ground, trying to grab his feet. He kicked desperately, and we pulled him up. But it was too late. His eyes were glazed over, as if he had seen something he shouldn't have. "We shouldn't have come here," he murmured. I already knew that, but now it was too late. We kept walking, faster and faster, more and more desperate. The forest closed in around us, and then we saw it, the exit, or what seemed to be it, an open trail in the middle of the fog. Ryan and Tom ran ahead. Ashley looked me in the eye. "If this is a trick, we have no choice." She nodded, and we ran together, our hearts racing, our lungs burning. The sound of voices behind us grew louder, and then we crossed the trail. I stumbled and fell to the ground. The cold was still in my chest, but the sun was rising. We could hear birds singing, the normal sounds of the forest. Eric fell beside me, panting. We left. Tom and Ryan were in shock. Ashley was shaking, her eyes wide, but we saw no one else in the forest. No children, no silhouettes, no sounds, nothing. We were on the other side of the trail, back at the parking lot, but something was wrong. My chest still hurt. I slowly stood up. The car was there, the same car we had left before we went in. But then, as we got closer, we saw it. The car window was fogged up, and written there, in childish writing, was a message. "We can still see you." My breath hitched, and when I looked at Ashley, she was staring into the rearview mirror of the car. Her lips were trembling. I turned slowly and saw, in the reflection of the glass, behind us, in the middle of the forest, there was a line of eyeless children, smiling, and then, like shadows, they disappeared. But we knew the truth. The calling forest never lets anyone leave completely, and sooner or later, they would come for us. I should never have stayed at that hotel. My trip to Louisiana was for work, not a vacation or fun. Just another small town, another boring meeting, and a night in some cheap hotel before catching my flight home. The plan was simple, but nothing that night went as planned. I arrived late, almost 11 at night. The hotel was in the center of town, an old 3-story building with a worn facade. The neon sign flickered erratically, as if it were struggling to stay lit. The name, Hotel Bellevue. I had never heard of it, but it was the only one available in that area. As I walked in, I noticed that the lobby was empty. No guests, no one at the front desk. Just an old clock on the wall, showing 11:07 at night, and the muffled sound of a radio playing old music somewhere in the building. I rang the front desk bell. Silence. I rang again. After a few seconds, an elderly man appeared, wearing an old receptionist uniform. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes. Name's Jake Coleman." He nodded, picked up a paper book. "Yes, no computers. and leafed through it slowly until he found my name. Room 405, top floor. I took the key and thanked him. But before I went up, I asked a question that I didn't even understand why I asked. Is the hotel empty today? The receptionist stopped, his dark eyes fixed on mine for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. Number, you just haven't heard them yet. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I just nodded and headed for the elevator. The elevator was old. The cabin shook slightly as it ascended, and the lights flickered every time it passed from one floor to the next. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, a cold wind came from the hallway. The atmosphere here was different. The walls had a yellowish tint, as if no one had painted them in decades. The old carpet creaked under my feet, and the smell of mold was strong. But the worst was the silence, the feeling that someone was watching me. My room was 405 at the end of the hallway. As I walked, I noticed that the doors to the other rooms didn't have numbers, just old, worn signs. But when I passed room 403, something made me stop. The sound of whispering came from inside, low, faint, as if someone was talking on the other side of the door. My heart raced, but as I got closer, the whispering stopped. I swallowed hard and continued walking to my room. Room 405 was small and simple. A double bed, a dresser, an old mirror in the corner, and a tiny bathroom. I threw my suitcase on the floor, took off my shoes, and threw myself on the bed. I tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that the place gave me. Maybe it was just tiredness. Maybe. But then I heard it again. Whispers. This time, inside my room. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the mirror. I slowly turned and looked at the mirror in the corner of the room. The surface seemed distorted, as if something was on the other side. But then, the light bulb flickered, and for a brief second, I saw a face in the mirror, pale, deep-set eyes, just watching me. My throat went dry. I blinked and the face disappeared. But the whispers, they didn't stop. I tried to ignore them. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and took a deep breath. It's just tiredness. But when I looked up, the bathroom door was open, and I was absolutely sure I had closed it. Fear crept up my spine. Something was in the room with me. I walked out of the bathroom slowly and looked around. The bed was the same, the mirror unchanged. But then I felt something moving in the hallway outside. I got close to the door and looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. Room 403 had its door open now, and in the hallway, a silhouette standing still, small, leaning against the open door, looking in my direction. The hallway light flickered, and then the silhouette disappeared. My lungs seized. Instinct screamed to get out of there immediately. But before I could do anything, the room phone rang, slow, shrill. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I walked over to the phone with a shaking hand and answered it. Hello? Silence, and then whispers, low, faint, but this time I understood what they were saying. You're in the wrong room. The phone hung up on its own. The temperature dropped. I knew what that meant. Someone, or something, was waiting on the other side of the door, and in that moment, I knew. I was no longer alone in that room. The phone hung up on its own. The silence in the room was suffocating. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. You're in the wrong room. The words echoed in my mind. What did that mean? And more importantly, who had called me? My palms were sweating as I looked around the room. Something was wrong. The room felt different, as if the furniture had been moved a few inches. But that wasn't all. There was a strange smell in the air, Moldavian wet earth. And then I heard it, the voices again, low, cold. He shouldn't be here. He needs to leave. It's too late now. My blood ran cold. The sound was coming from inside the walls. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control my breathing. Then I turned to the door. I had to get out of there. I gripped the doorknob tightly and turned it. Nothing. The door didn't open. I locked and unlocked the lock. Still nothing. My stomach churned. I was trapped. I stepped away from the door and picked up the phone to call the front desk. No signal. The phone was dead. Sweat dripped down my forehead. It was then that I heard a new sound, coming from the hallway. Footsteps, slow, heavy. They were rhythmic, like someone was approaching my door. My muscles locked. The shadow appeared in the crack of the door. Someone was standing on the other side. The doorknob moved. Once, twice. My body was paralyzed with fear. Then, a knock. Then another, and another. The door shook. I stepped further away, feeling the air grow colder. Then, out of nowhere, silence returned. I stood there for several minutes, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. The only sound was my own heavy breathing. I took a deep breath, and then I gathered my courage. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. My stomach churned. The hallway looked different. The lights flickered slowly. The old carpet now looked worn and covered in dust. And at the end of the hallway, the door to room 403 was still open. But now, I could see what was inside. It was too dark, as if the light itself didn't enter that room. And then, I saw something coming out of it. A small silhouette, walking slowly. My heart raced. That wasn't human. The way she moved, her light steps. It was like she was floating. My instinct screamed to move away, but before I could react, she looked straight at me. My body froze. Her eyes were black, sunken, lifeless. And then, a whisper came through the door. Low, cold. You shouldn't have come here. My lungs failed. The shadow disappeared. But something told me she was now inside my room. I needed to get out of there. I ran to the window, but we were on the 4th floor. There was no way I could jump. I went back to the door and tried the lock again. This time, it opened. The hallway was now normal. The lights were on. The carpet was old, but clean. And what about room 403? The door was closed again. There was no one there. Everything seemed normal, but I knew the truth. Nothing was normal. I grabbed my suitcase on an impulse and left the room, closing the door behind me. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist was still there, sitting at the counter, as if he had never moved. He looked at me without surprise. Problem with the room, Mr. Coleman? My mouth was dry. What happened upstairs? He studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. You got the wrong room. My chest tightened. What do you mean by that? He didn't answer. He just slid a new ledger across the counter and pointed to a page. My eyes widened when I saw what was written. My name wasn't on the guest list, but someone with my last name was. Coleman, 1954. I swallowed hard. This must be a mistake. The desk clerk just kept smiling. Maybe. At this point, I didn't want any more answers. I just wanted to get out of there. I threw a $20 bill on the counter and walked out the door, not looking back. I got in my car and sped away from that damn hotel. But as I drove, a thought gnawed at me. If I was in the wrong room, who was in the right room that night? And worst of all, who was still waiting for me inside? I should never have gone back to that place. The playground from my childhood was still there, abandoned, rusted, lost in the middle of a forgotten suburb in Ohio. They say that after the accident, no one had the courage to renovate it. I wasn't sure if I believed those stories, but after that night, I knew the truth. I went back to the city for my mother's funeral. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but it was necessary. The old neighborhood where I grew up looked even more run down than I remembered. Houses with broken windows, empty streets, a heavy silence in the air, and in the middle of it all, the playground. I hadn't planned on driving by it, but as I drove down that deserted street, my eyes were drawn to it. The swings were still there, creaking slightly in the wind. The metal slide was covered in rust. The merry-go-round, still, as if waiting for someone. But the worst, The old spring horse, still there, waiting. The last time I saw him, he was covered in blood. When I was 8, a boy died on that playground. No one knows exactly how it happened, but he was playing on the spring horse when something happened. My mother never told me the details. She would only say, "Never go there at night, ever." And that night, I broke that rule. I parked the car and got out. The cold wind bit my skin, but I kept walking, as if something was pulling me there. The playground was exactly as I remembered it, but the silence around it, it was wrong. No crickets, no rustling of leaves, just the creaking of the empty swings. And then, I heard it. Children's laughter, low, almost imperceptible. My spine froze. I turned my head back. Nothing. But I knew what I had heard. I knew. I took a few more steps into the playground. The soft sand ground gave way beneath my feet. And then, the swing moved on its own. I stopped dead in my tracks. The wind was cold, yes, but not strong enough to rock just one of the swings. I approached slowly. The creaking was loud, annoying, like a warning. That's when I saw it. The footprints in the sand, small footsteps, leading to the swing, but there was no one there, and that was when I heard my name. Jake. My blood ran cold. The sound came from behind me. I turned around in a rush, my heart pounding. Nothing. But then, the spring-loaded horse started moving on its own. My legs felt heavy, but I knew I had to run. Something was watching me. The air around me turned cold. The merry-go-round began to creak, turning slowly, but there was no one there. Then, the laughter returned, and now, it was coming from all sides. "Jake, let's play." My breath caught. I ran to the car without looking back. I opened the door and got in, locking everything. My heart was beating so hard I thought I was going to pass out. The silence returned, but before I started the engine, something made me look in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A pale child sitting on the swing, staring at me, and then she smiled and disappeared. That night I realized something. The playground was never abandoned, and now they know I'm back. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. I wanted to believe it wasn't real. But when I closed my eyes that night, all I could see was the smile of the child on the swing. I should have left town first thing in the morning, but something made me go back to the playground, and that's when everything got worse. The day was cloudy when I parked near the playground again. I didn't even know why I was there, but I needed to be sure. The wind blew slowly, making the swings creak. The place seemed colder, more dead. I heard my own heart beating as I took my first step onto the sand. This time I paid attention to the details. The merry-go-round was still standing in the same place. The slide was covered in rust, and the spring horse, it was turned toward me, as if it knew I was coming back. I swallowed hard and looked down at the sand, and then I realized footprints, small bare feet marking the sand, heading toward the spring horse. I wanted to back away. I wanted to run away. But before I could react, I heard the first laugh. My whole body froze. The sound came from the slide. I turned my head slowly. The slide seemed empty, but I felt it. Someone was there. The sand beneath it was marked with footprints. And then I heard it. The voice, low, whispered, "Wanna play?" My lungs seized up. The slide was empty. But then I saw something moving in the sand. The footprints formed on their own, as if something invisible was walking toward me. The wind picked up. The merry-go-round started spinning on its own. The spring-loaded horse squeaked, and then the sand shifted, as if something was crawling underneath it. I ran. My mind screamed that this was impossible, but as I ran back to the car, I felt something touching my leg, cold, small, as if a child's hands were trying to hold me down. I jumped into the car and slammed the door. My breathing was ragged. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The playground looked normal, but I knew they were still there. And then I saw something written on the car window, in tiny letters, as if a child had used their fingers to draw in the dust. "Don't go away." I didn't sleep that night. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt the cold air inside the room, and I saw it. The window was open, and on the glass, the same message as before, written again, but this time in a more desperate tone. "Don't go away." Then I heard the creak, low, slow, coming from inside the room. I knew what it was. I knew, because I had heard that sound before. It was the sound of a spring-loaded horse moving by itself. My body froze, and when I turned around, I saw it, the doll. A doll sitting in the corner of the room, in a faded blue dress, cracked porcelain, and with a smile that was too wide. The same doll I remembered from the playground when I was a child. I had never brought it home, but now it was there, and I knew what it meant. The playground didn't want me to leave, and now it had followed me.